We've been usually filming outside, and I'm speaking a bit louder because the weather keeps changing. You're not sure whether it's summer or autumn. In fact, I've had to brush leaves up twice. I'll have it again to do because of the storms, when usually it only happened in the autumn time. So between rain and wind, and then I think it's to become really warm into the 20s in a few days ago. Perhaps we'll talk too much about the weather in Northern Ireland, but it changes so frequently, it tends to be the main focus of conversation. Indeed, the phrase, someone's as changeable as the weather, their moods just go back and forward, and our environment gives us that image very quickly. It'd be great to be able to forecast it. You can maybe hear the wind in the background here. Maybe we'll get a moment and then we'll go inside. But how do you forecast it? It used to be said in the countryside, maybe you've heard of it, when the cattle are sitting down on the grass, that means it's going to rain. Well, maybe a bit of a tale, if I use the pun. But on the other hand, maybe it's low pressure, which means it's colder, and therefore the animals just happen to sit down. But I wouldn't really want to forecast when you'll plant and when you'll sow just by looking at the cattle. One, we often say when we see smoke going out of a chimney and the smoke coming down, oh, rain's coming. Well, it's usually pretty obvious at that stage, and the forecast isn't much beyond maybe a few hours or a day. But how do you forecast? Well, I think we'll go inside now before another blast of wind comes around the corner, and I'll show you my way of forecasting. We'll just come into the porch, and it's just round here. My barometer. It's an old aneroid, but it always works. Now, I marked it this morning, and it has moved a wee bit to the right. I'll mark it again, another tap, and at the moment, it's just in the middle. It could go one way, or it could go the other. Once it goes over a certain line, then I'm pretty confident it's going to be a good day. When it falls the other, I'm also sure we are in for a storm. Once more, it's based on the pressure. At least it's a bit more scientifically accurate. When there's low pressure, there's likely to be rain. When it's high, the sun's coming out. Forecasting the weather, it's great to have something that's much more technically based. And of course, the Met Office today is like that. We can get forecasts that are fairly accurate now. Used to be a few years ago, there might have been an odd blip or two, but the television recently showed the computer system they have in headquarters, which is quite phenomenal. They are able to predict where winds are coming up to around the 4 or 5 days now with reasonable accuracy. And we have probably now started to become more reliant on the Met Office forecasts when we want to plan ahead within the next, say, 2 or 3 days. The Met Office began its work in the mid-19th century, and it had nothing to do with forecasting the weather for us. It all came out of the ships that were crossing, and especially the sailing ships, in the mid-1800s. To know the tides, the pull of the wind, and where things were coming from on the sea, so that there could be at least a little bit of forecasting to enable ships to safely travel. And of course, knowing the weather on the sea means everything. In fact, many people were thinking of VE Day not so long ago, and if you look back in history, you'll find the landings that went to Normandy were held up for about 24 hours until they hoped the weather had improved. So it was an essential thing in the 19th century, and today you get on the radio the shipping forecast, and it's only out of that over the century that we now have the Met Office telling all of us about the weather, forecasting ahead. It's really hard to look into the future. Can any of us plan? And especially with the weather, everything is so changeable and unpredictable. Most people would long for being able to see a bit ahead, but that's not possible. I suppose where we are at the moment, if we all look back just 4 months, we couldn't have imagined the changes that have hit us and have hit the world with the global pandemic. Forecasting isn't very easy. In fact, it's not really possible other than a wee bit with the weather. In the Old Testament, that early section of the Bible, you have a word describing people whom God used to bring a message to the nation from him. They're called prophets. Now, they just didn't foretell looking to the future. In fact, there are only a few occasions in which God gave them something to look ahead to. They often foretold, they brought a message from God into life as it was, with all its ups and all its downs, so that the people might face the future confident and trusting in him. One of the well-known prophets in the Old Testament is Daniel. Many people have heard of him, and God used him to tell the people where he was living what God wanted to say into their lives. Now, Daniel himself had been taken prisoner and he became an exile in another country. So life wasn't easy. Life just didn't go ahead for him straightforwardly, even when he was called and used by God. But Daniel the prophet spoke on occasions about what would lie ahead, but also spoke as to what God wanted to happen there and then. And Daniel, looking at forecasting, looking at his life, looking at the seasons and things changing back and forward, said a few words. And he captured the essence that in the midst of change, God was certain. And in the midst of uncertainty, God still kept and shaped things for the future. People sometimes could make a mess of life, wars could occur, and even natural situations like pandemics would arise, but yet God caused life to continue, and his hand was upholding everything. And that was a good message to hold on to, not only in the present, but when you wondered what would happen in the future. I want to finish by reading a couple of those words from Daniel. Find it in the Old Testament here. We're going to just turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 2. God changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. So when we come to tomorrow or the next day, it's good to hold on to that promise, especially from a prophet of a long, long time ago. And indeed, when we come to the end of the Bible, to the last prophet, the end of the Old Testament, I should say, the prophet of Malachi. And when the Old Testament closes and there was silence for several centuries before the birth of Jesus, that is silence from God with any new message. The last prophet tells us that God said, I don't change. The weather, since we came in, it's changed again. The wind's dying down, but who knows for how long? At least there's someone who upholds the seasons, the times of the year, and yet he remains unchanging.